Hey folks, my name is Robin and welcome back to Only the Best Fantasy Novels. Today I want to talk about my favorite new fantasy releases of the last 3 months of 2024. A lot of pretty interesting books came out, so I'm excited to just talk about these. Um, in pretty much every case, if you want like further information, further like deep dives, whatever, I have separate videos you can dive into. But this is just like essentially a wrap up. But yeah, first and foremost is actually a book that did not come out in the last 3 months. It came out just a little bit before, but when I initially saw it, I thought it was science fiction. Turns out it's a genre-defying blend, and that is Rake's Fall by Vajra Chandrasekhar. So, The Saint of Bright Doors completely blew my mind, and Rake's Fall just took things to a whole other level. This book, it was incredible. It certainly does fit the bill of science fiction, but it also has so many other elements to it that it's one of those novels that there's no point trying to pigeonhole it. It's just a really great read. And if you're a fan of his, definitely a book worth checking out. And coincidentally, it does take place within the same multiverse as the Saint of Bright Doors. So there's that. The next book came out on July 9th, and that is The Blood Dim Tide by Stephen Arion. I was lucky enough to get an arc for this, and this was just a really great follow up to last year's the um, the last year's The Judas Blossom. He like that book did a really good job of pretty much setting the stage, introducing everyone, and this one things really escalated. Like, it was action packed from start to finish. We got some deep dives that really helped to flesh out things and just kind of hook us deeper into this conflict. And there were some seeds planted for going into the third book that I'm excited to see how this story all wraps up. If you're not familiar with this series, it's essentially a fantastical version. It's essentially a what if of if the Mongol Empire had magic at its disposal, and incredible, absolutely. Once again, you're a fan of the series, definitely want to get this book. Moving on July 16th, we had The West Passage by Jared Petracek. I think that's how that's pronounced. And this is just a weird, really imaginative novel. It's heavily influenced by, or heavily inspired by Gorman Gas, I should say, but it's just it's 100% its own thing beyond that. Incredibly creative. The book itself is just packed with all this amazing artwork because the author is an artist also, and it's by the time I was done, I suspected this could easily be my book of the year, and at this point in time, I'm fairly sure it will be my book of 2024. So there's that. Moving on July 23rd, we had one of my most anticipated releases of this year, and that is The Book of Elsewhere by China Miéville and Keanu Reeves. This is the first new China Miéville novel in years, so I could not wait to get my hands on this. At the same time, I didn't have as high expectations as I normally would for China Miéville, because this is very much a tie-in novel to Keanu Reeves' comic series Berserker, and I expected some limitations and constraints as a result of that, and I wasn't disappointed in that regard. Still a really good book. Everything I love about China Miéville was on display here in new and creative ways, and it was a fun read. It didn't blow my mind, but it by no means was it a disappointment. So yeah. Moving things along, also on July 23rd, we had The Reckoning of Roku by Randy Rebay, which is the start of an all-new duology in the Chronicles of the Avatar, but this one follows Avatar Roku. And this book, it essentially shows us what happens when Roku leaves the Fire Nation to go and learn the first discipline in his cycle, which is airbending. And we get essentially his first adventure as an avatar, and trying to come to terms with what that means for him. This is the first book in the overall Chronicles of the Avatar that wasn't written by SCE, so I wasn't quite sure if it would work or not. But Randy Rebay did a spectacular job of it. Like there were so many things in here that it just brought back a lot of nostalgia for the show, and he smashed it out of the park. And like I'm excited to see the next book in the duology. So there's that. To keep things moving along, on August 6th we had The Dead Cattail Assassins by P. Jelly Clark, which is a pretty quick, fun novella of an assassin who accepts a job and then she finds out it's a little more than she bargained for. I just had a blast with P. Jelly Clark's A Master of Gin, so at that point I decided I'm pretty much going to read everything he wrote. And so I had to jump on this, and I had a fun ride from start to finish, especially the finale. So if you've read this, you know what happens in the finale, and I am from the Caribbean, so that entire sequence at the end, I just had a blast. Like, this was an easy 5 stars to me. Moving on August 20th, we had The Dragon in Winter by Jonathan Mayberry. This wrapped up his Cake in the Dam's epic fantasy trilogy, which was just a really action-packed, gory, fun combination of fantasy and horror, Lovecraftian horror at that. It took the story in some new and interesting directions. I'm still not 100% sure how much I like the twist that went down in here, but for better or worse, that is the story we did get. And overall, like, I had a fun experience with the series as a whole. Like, Jonathan Mayberry is a very good writer. He wrote quite a bit of stuff before he came to this, so it shouldn't be any surprise that he smashes out to the park. If you're a fan of, like, there are some epic fantasy books that, even though they're quite thick, they kind of have that pulpy that kind of sense, that pulpy sense to them. This is one of those, so treat it as such and you'll have a blast. And yeah, like, pretty great stuff to just turn your mind off and read and enjoy. Moving on, a book that you probably shouldn't turn your mind off to read and enjoy is Warlords of Weirdwood by R.J. Barker. This is the follow-up to last year's Cards of the Weirdwood, and that first book was all stage setting, all introduction. This one, R.J. Barker just puts it to the metal and never lets go. Like, we get introduced to a lot of new stuff. Everything just kind of coalesces and comes together in really interesting ways, and this book was heavy from start to finish. Like, if you're a fan of the series, definitely one you have to get. You have to get for sure. And where things left off, I'm pretty hyped to see how the finale wraps up, especially because I felt like this book overall, it didn't quite do much to kind of push along that overarching story that's playing out in the background. So I'm even more hyped now for the finale to see just how everything is going to end. So there's that. And then the final book that came out in the last 3 months that I want to highlight is A Tide of Black Steel by Anthony Ryan. This is another book that I got an arc for, and I just had a really fun time with this one. Like, I remember I remember pointing out recently that, like, Viking inspired fiction really doesn't work for me unless there is some element of creativity or imaginativeness to it, which is sadly often not the case with those types of books inspired by that, which is its own discussion. But either way, Anthony Ryan perfectly falls in exactly what I hope for when I pick up a book that's inspired by Norse influences. And he, as is typical for Anthony Ryan, he delivers a book that just delves deep. It just has these complex layers to it in terms of, like, the religion and the politics and the conflict and the heart of all of that. And you should expect no different when you pick up this story. It is the first of a new trilogy, but at the same time, it is a series. It is a sequel series to his Covenant of Steel trilogy, and it does contain some spoilers for how that series ends. So if you plan to read that trilogy, I would recommend you read that trilogy first before you read this. You don't necessarily have to understand everything that happens in this one. There are some threads that kind of roll over, and like I said, if you plan to read that trilogy, read it first before you read this. If you don't care, just dive straight into this, and understand that you will get some stuff spoiled for that trilogy, how it wraps up. And and just the story in general. Like quite a bit of things get spoiled in this one. And yeah, that's all the new books that I've read over the course of July, August, September that were released in July, August, and September that I just had a blast with. If you've read any of these, feel free to drop a comment. Let's talk about them. If you haven't come across of these any before, I'm happy I was able to bring them to your attention. And if you've made it this far into the video, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.